for 2.5 years of my college education. After college, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant and went straight into the Air Force. I served in the Cold War, which some people would argue is part of World War II. I served in Bosnia, Operation Joint Guard, in Iraq under Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Afghanistan in Operation Enduring Freedom.
Could you tell me about that first experience?
The first experience in the Air Force? Straight out of college, I drove from Maryland, which is where I'm originally from, and out to California. My first assignment was as a missile launch officer, and I used to operate Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. So my first experience in the Air Force was 4 months away from home, away from family. But my first assignment after that was to Grand Forks, North Dakota, where I would drive out to the missile field, go underground for 24 hours at a time, hoping never to have to do what I was trained to do.
Why did you join?
I grew up in the military. My father was in the Army. He retired from the Army. It's a sense of honor of wanting to serve my country. Honestly, part of it was the benefit aspect. Like I said, the Air Force paid for about 2.5 years of my undergraduate degree.
Why did you pick
the scholarship? I was an alternate for a 4-year scholarship, and I just kind of liked the Air Force. The recruiters in Maryland, they took a bunch of us out to dinner one night, and they showed us a video of an A-10 and what the A-10 aircraft can do. I mean, it's a tank killer. And after watching that and the power that aircraft had, I said, I want to be a part of that. I knew I couldn't be a pilot because I wear glasses, but I just wanted to be part of that in a support role.
And I think you said it, but just to clarify, where were you living when you joined up?
I'm originally from Maryland, small town Brunswick, Maryland. It sits right on the border of Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia.
You were describing that first experience. What did it feel like for you to be there?
I don't know. It's a little scary. I mean, it was my first real job. When I was in high school and college, I'd worked at a couple of restaurants. I worked for a department store chain called Montgomery Ward's. But here I am in the military, learning how to fire a .38 handgun, learning the operating system of a Minuteman III ICBM. It's a little daunting when you think of the responsibility that you have guarding our nation's missile force. The responsibility of knowing that if we would go to war, you might actually have to turn keys and launch those missiles.
Did you have a boot camp or a training group?
The Air Force at that time was kind of unique because I was in ROTC in the 4-year program. Our boot camp, per se, was a 4-week training course. So it wasn't like what you see on TV or in the movies. It was mostly about leadership training, learning how to march, learning more about the organization of the Air Force, command and control, that type of thing. But we did do our physical training and our running. And
did you find find that strenuous at all?
Not so much. In all honesty, it was 4 weeks, and there were some challenging parts about it, so not too bad.
Do you remember your instructor?
Let's see, I had Captain Carlos Cherry was my flight commander, and I don't remember any other names. But I do remember Captain Cherry.
Good impressions from instructors?
Yeah, well, that was just from the boot camp. From ROTC, I had a number of them. I remember the first professor of aerospace studies, that's the top individual at a ROTC detachment in the Air Force, was Colonel Noble, and then he was replaced by Colonel Bruce. But when I went to field training, Colonel Noble happened to be in charge of the region, so when he came down to visit the encampment, he came over to see me, and all the other instructors just kind of stepped away to let him have time with me since I was one of his cadets.
From your basic, you went to ROTC?
No, I was in ROTC all 4 years during college, and what that entailed was 1 day a week we would have to wear our uniform, and you'd learn drill and ceremonies, which is basically your marching and parades, and then you'd learn about aerospace doctrine, management and leadership. When you were a freshman and sophomore, I think it was a 1 credit course, and then when you were an upperclassman, they were 3 credits.
Okay, and where did you go from there?
From right out of college, I went into the Air Force. I graduated. I was one of the last people in my ROTC detachment to get their assignment, and I was the first one on active duty. I got my orders about May 23rd, I got my orders, and I was on active duty the 1st of July. And the first thing I did, I drove out to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California to learn the missile operations. After my training, I went to Grand Forks Air Force Base up in North Dakota, and I was there for 4 years as a missile launch officer, as a deputy, as a commander, and as an instructor. So, help train the people or keep people proficient in their weapon system operations.
And do you remember arriving and what that was like?
My wife grew up on a farm, and the military was completely foreign to her and her family. And I remember driving into North Dakota. She was crying because all of a sudden this was so real. It's like, wow, this is real. We're actually moving to North Dakota, and the day we arrived, it had been raining all day. And as soon as we crossed the border into North Dakota, the sky opened up. It was a beautiful sunny day, and she just took that as a sign. Didn't realize that for the next 21 years we'd be moving around the country following the winds of the Air Force.
So that was your job to make sure other people were proficient?
That was one of the jobs. The main job was to be available to launch the missiles if we ever had to.
Did you ever have any of those scary situations where you might have to, or did you have to?
No. If I did, it'd be classified, but no, I did not.
Okay, and then where did you go?
After that, the wall came down over in Berlin, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the missile career field, we were just closing down the ground-launched cruise missiles over in Europe, so we had all these missile people that they were having trouble placing in jobs. So the Air Force decided to cross-train me into the contracting career field. And they sent me to the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. And I went there as a graduate student to learn acquisition and contracting management. And I earned my master's degree there. And that was 18 months of assignment as a student.
What was that like?
That was great. To be a full-time student drawing full-time benefits and pay, that was great because I had no other additional duties.
And then where did you go?
After I graduated, I stayed there at Wright-Pat, and I was in the engine program office buying C-17 engines, and then I moved to the C-17 program office where I bought support equipment and helped put there was a settlement agreement that was negotiated between the Secretary of Defense at the time and the McDonnell Douglas Corporation to do some spec relief and a lot of other things. It was pretty complex, so I helped put that on contract.
Standout memories from that?
It was a lot of hard work, a lot of long hours, but it's pretty rewarding because at the time the C-17 was being referred to as the troubled C-17, and Congress was actually considering canceling the program. So a lot of the stuff I did helped keep the program in existence. And today the C-17 is one of the warfighters' favorite airplanes that we have. Yeah, I helped save the C-17 program.
And
After that, I went to Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. I was doing some classified contracting and base operating support contracting.
And how was that?
Well, I didn't want to go. But then once I was there, I didn't want to leave. It ended up being a 3-year assignment. While I was there, they needed volunteers to go to Bosnia. And I volunteered and went to Bosnia for 4.5 months. So that was an exciting time. Probably one of the most rewarding things I did in the military was my deployment to Bosnia.
Before we get there, why didn't you want to go to the new location?
I was supposed to go to another assignment, Hanscom Air Force Base. It's just a high-cost area, and wasn't exactly where I wanted to go. But don't always get a choice in the matter.
Okay, so tell me about your first impressions of Bosnia.
My first impression of Bosnia, I flew in on commercial flights. They had just opened up the airport in Sarajevo, and after probably 18 hours of traveling, I got off the plane, and as you walk out of the terminal, the first vision you have of Bosnia, of Sarajevo, is this apartment complex right across the highway, and it is all bombed out, and people still living in it. See satellite dishes hanging on the balconies, but it was spotty, but there are still people living in it. It's that wow factor. It's like the only way I can explain it. It's like seeing pictures of the Grand Canyon and seeing the Grand Canyon. It's like, yeah, you see pictures and it's very pretty and awesome, but then when you're there, it is just totally breathtaking. To see pictures on the news or in the papers about the destruction it doesn't do it justice. But to actually walk through the city, see the destruction, talk with the people. I got there in 1997, which was shortly after their war began. And we had 6 translators that worked in our office. I was attached to the NATO contracting cell there in Sarajevo. And to hear the personal stories from the translators was very, very moving. One of the translators, her father was killed by a sniper. One of them, her house was shelled 7 times and still standing and still living in it. Another translator lived in the apartment complex across the highway, and a mortar hit the apartment right above her while she was in it, while she was in her apartment. Killed her neighbors, and she survived. One of my translators fought in the Army. So very moving to hear their stories of, walking 2 miles to get water during the war down a sniper alley, which is the main route through Sarajevo. And I got there shortly after hostilities ceased. So you had city blocks that were still ripped off because they hadn't gone through to clear out any unexploded ordnances. So you had the buildings that were all blown up, and the compound where I stayed was an old army barracks, and we had buildings there that was still flagged off not to go in. My building was a 3-story building. The ground floor had been patched up so that we could live and work there, and then upstairs was still not usable. It had no windows, just open to the elements.
So what was your assignment when you arrived?
My assignment there, I was the deputy chief of the contracting office in Sarajevo. So,
did you ever see combat?
Me personally, no, that was not my job.
But did you experience it around you?
In Bosnia? No. Fortunately, hostilities had ceased, and I don't even remember seeing any reports about attacks or anything. When I was in Sarajevo, it was more for rebuilding, nation building.
Can you tell me a couple of your most memorable experiences?
And
Either from Bosnia or...
when I was in Bosnia, President Clinton came to town, and we didn't have a lot of Americans in Sarajevo. I believe we had like 80 because it was a NATO operation. And I got to be part of the crowd that went to see the Clinton family at the airport. President Clinton, his wife and daughter, the Secretary of State was Madeleine Albright, was there. So I got to shake hands with all of them. So that was pretty cool.
Were you awarded, can you tell me about any of the medals or citations that you received?
Out of Bosnia, I got the NATO medal was given to all military from all the NATO nations. And in the American, the way we prioritize our medals that we would wear, anything awarded from another nation has the absolute lowest priority. And oddly enough, that was the one I was absolutely the most proud of from my career. Also, during that time, we were awarded the Armed Services Expeditionary Medal and the Armed Forces Services Medal. And I was also awarded the Joint Commendation Medal.
Now, outside of Bosnia, were there others? Just the way you said it, made me think that maybe there were other medals or citations.
Oh, through my career, yeah, I had various medals from various deployments and assignments. The highest medal I got was the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. But got that, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Joint Commendation Medal, Air Force Commendation Medal, the Army Commendation Medal from another deployment, and I can't rattle them all off. I could get that for you if you'd like the list. Okay.
Okay, so from Bosnia, where did you go?
I returned back to my assignment at Hanscom and found out I had an assignment, and I went to Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu, Hawaii, where I was assigned to the Pacific Air Force's Inspector General Staff, and I was there for 2 years, traveling the Pacific, inspecting contracting units for compliance with regulations, but we'd also do warfighting exercises where we'd inspect like self-aid buddy care, command and control, emergency operations, and so I got to visit all of our bases in Pacific Air Forces. So Japan, Korea, Guam, and Alaska.
What was that like?
That was great. For one thing, I got to travel and see all these different places that I'd never been before. But I got to see people doing their best at serving their country. It's what they trained to do. They were proud of what they were doing. You see these young troops straight out of high school, and all of a sudden they're thrown into this warfighting exercise. Wearing the gas mask, wearing the chemical gear, and trying to do their job at the same time. But to watch people do what they train to do, and keeping in mind that this is an all-volunteer military that we have. I don't think we have any people who were drafted left on active duty now. But it was exciting to watch their excitement and their sense of urgency when they basically do their job, do their warfighting mission. Because we do exercises and like self-aid buddy care exercise, and people would have to do that first aid on somebody's simulated injury, and to watch that just kick in and see people react. So you know the training works. You know the warfighters we have are dedicated to what they're doing. Nobody's there because they're being forced to do it. Everybody wants to do it.
Now, all that traveling, do you have any standout memories from that?
Not really. Not really. I mean, everybody was doing a great job. My standout memories would be the friends that I had from the inspection team. There's only about 40 of us that were permanent party. So nothing really that stands out from there.
And from there, where did you go?
I went to Eielson Air Force Base up in Alaska, and I was the contracting squadron commander. And I was there for 2 years as the contracting squadron commander.
Was it like in Alaska?
My favorite assignment. And we absolutely loved Alaska. I have 3 sons, and they were all active in scouting. So we got to do camping, go sightseeing, just to see so much unspoiled territory. Just beautiful, beautiful state. And we hated to leave there when we left, because we were only there for 2 years, and there's still so much we would have liked to have done.
Now, your family is
Oh, they were with me every step of the way. Yeah, well, they didn't go to the combat zones, but yeah, they were with me every step of the way. I'd get my assignment notification, and the first thing my wife did was research the area to find out where in the world are we going. I remember when I found out I was going to North Dakota. North Dakota? It's like, what in the world is in North Dakota? And but she found out all kinds of things. Custer, General George Custer was up there. I can't even remember some of the other things, but she'd do the research, and then we try to go hit the sites. As my sons got older, it was important to us to take them to see the historical sites. So they have been on battlefields in New England, and Revolutionary battlefields and historic sites. Being from Maryland, we go back and see family, so they saw Civil War sites. We were in Hawaii, they saw World War II sites with Pearl Harbor. My oldest son had been to the USS Missouri so many times, he could practically give the tour himself. So they all have a very deep connection to the military as well, because they know what I went through and what they had to go through. And they know that there are people out there that just don't like the military, don't like having a standing military. But my sons are very patriotic. They were all very active in Scouts. They all achieved the Eagle Scout, which only 2% of Boy Scouts ever get to do, and all three of my sons did that. Because the bases had very active scouting programs. But I think they enjoyed it. People ask me, how did they adjust to all that moving around? It's like they thought it was normal. Doesn't everybody do that? Yeah, and but seriously, they thought it was normal, especially when you go from one military base to another military base. Everybody on that base is the same as you. They're living a nomadic life. Their mother or father or both are in the military, subject to deployment, subject to long hours. But the kids all know that, and they think it's normal. A couple of our assignments, we lived off base, and that was very different, to be so unique, because all of a sudden they're in a school where their friends may or may not have any connection to the military, and then they become that unique individual. When we left Alaska, we moved to Oklahoma, and at Tinker Air Force Base, and we lived off base in Oklahoma, about 30 miles away. And my oldest son was in the 9th grade, and we got there and registered them for school the first day of school. The moves aren't always so accommodating. They're not always very well timed. But we got to Oklahoma and got them registered for school the first day of school, and my oldest son joined the marching band. And he said they're at marching band practice, and the band director, they knew him because he's the new kid, and they called him Alaska Boy because we just moved down from Alaska.
Well, it's good that on the whole it seems that everyone in the family is treating it as a positive growth experience rather than a stressful.
Oh, it was not without stress. When we were in Oklahoma, I went to Iraq, and I had just had surgery. They removed my gallbladder, and 3 weeks later, I was in Iraq. And my sons knew I was deploying. They didn't know where I was going because they were fairly young. I guess my oldest son was in high school, and the other two were both in middle school. And we didn't want to burden them with that stress. So we didn't say where I was going. We just said it was classified. My middle son, not taking no for an answer, he he'd ask my wife things, what time is it where Dad is, and he'd ask these questions, and she realized he's finding out what time it was, and then going to school and looking at the globe and trying to figure out the time zones, figure out where I was. So she finally told them where I was, so that they wouldn't be so worried, and they handled it pretty well. And, I'd call them. I had access to email, and I could write them and send them back souvenirs from different places I'd been.
So you went to Oklahoma and then you went to Iraq.
Yes, while I was in Oklahoma, I was in Iraq.
And what was your assignment?
In Oklahoma or Iraq?
They were different.
In Oklahoma, I was the deputy chief of the purchasing supply chain management. We were standing up we were doing a project for the Air Force, implementing supply chain tenets across Air Force Materiel Command. When I went to Iraq, I was the Chief of Contracts, Multinational Forces, Iraq. I was Chief of Contracts, Combined Joint Task Force, and I was actually the last one to hold that position. And because then in 1st of July 2004, I was there. They transitioned to the Multinational Forces, Iraq, and we returned control of the country back to the Iraqi people while I was there. They had, in order to prevent not knowing what was going to happen when that would happen, we ended up transitioning it back 2 days ahead of what was scheduled. So I was in Iraq for a while and got out around the country, which is interesting over there, having never been in the Middle East, not being in the desert, or it's a completely different culture. And I'd been deployed before. I'd been to Bosnia, but when I was in Bosnia, I got to interact with people. I had my translators. We would go out and talk to different vendors. We could go out to the local market. It was a safe area. In Iraq, it was completely different. You didn't interact with the local people. I had no interpreters that worked for me. I didn't interface so much with the people. I was more, management leadership type thing. I had offices around the country that I would go out to visit. They were the ones that interacted with the local national people.
What first impressions of Iraq did you have?
The combat landing is always exciting. Wasn't expecting that, and when we loaded up I flew in on a C-130, flew on a charter flight to Frankfurt, got on the C-130, and they told us there are bags on, took the charter flight to Qatar, and from Qatar they put you on the smaller planes to go down range. They put our stuff on a pallet, and we asked, should we keep our body armor out? Oh no, you won't need it. Then we did the combat landing into Baghdad, and as we're landing, the flight crew is pulling out their body armor, and we're all wondering, what's up with that? You tell us to leave ours on the pallet. So I don't know if we were being traced or what. And we landed. It was the middle of the night, and so you're getting your stuff off the pallet in the dark. Everybody's stuff looks the same. So, but then you're just in a compound. You've got the high walls with people in the towers, and hearing fire going off around you now and then. I'm a contracts guy. I'm not what I was expecting to do.
That must have been scary.
At times, but sometimes you kind of get numb to it too.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about that? The things that peripherally, combat things that were going on around you, and how that affected you?
Combat things. We would get mortar attacks. Mortars coming in over the wall. My youngest son asked me if I ever got shot at, and said never directly that I know of, and he kind of gave me this puzzled look. Direct fire is where somebody points something at you and shoots you on purpose. Indirect fire is where they're throwing things over the wall and just hoping they hit something. So mortar fire is more indirect because we had the high walls. It's hard to aim. And we get rocket attacks. There was a rocket that went through the back of a semi-truck, which is about 50 yards behind my living container, and didn't detonate. It went through one side and out the other. Yeah. Even if it would have detonated, I think it was far enough away I probably wouldn't have been hurt. One day I was going to an office, and I was driving. I had a Expedition or Explorer, but I was driving over to this one office, and a friend of mine who I was actually going over to his office, he was walking along, so I stopped to pick him up. And when I stopped, the area where we were both going to had 5 mortars hit, and had I not stopped for him, I could have been right there with it. Then there's the convoys to get from, I was at Camp Victory, to go down into the green zone. At that time it was called the most dangerous stretch of highway in the world because of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And you drove your convoy as fast as the slowest vehicle could go. So we just go flying down the highway, and full battle rattle. You got your weapons ready. And again, I'm thinking, I'm a contracts guy. This is not what I signed up to do. But it's your job. You did sign up, and you have to do it.
Did you have any casualties?
No. One of my offices did get hit by mortar fire. Fortunately, nobody was injured. Nobody that worked for me in any of my deployments were ever injured. But I did have that one office, and I forget which compound it was hit by mortar hit right outside of it, and basically blew in the wall of where they were. From Baghdad, at the time I was stationed in Oklahoma, I got back from Baghdad on a Tuesday and in Oklahoma, and the following Monday I moved to Connecticut. So not a whole lot of advance warning, well, we knew that when I went to Baghdad that it was going to be tight, but that just meant you had mentioned family, and it's all part of the family. While I was in Baghdad, my family had to deal with the movers, getting the house packed up and shipped off to our next assignment, which was in East Hartford, Connecticut, where I went to Defense Contract Management Agency at Pratt & Whitney. And like I say, I got back from Iraq on Tuesday, and Monday we were moving to Connecticut. Again, the timing is not always conducive to family. We got to Connecticut about 2 weeks before school started, so we had 2 weeks. You can't really register your kids for school until you have an address. So we had 2 weeks to find a house. We ended up buying a house, so we had our contract that we took to the school so that the boys could start school where they were going to be living, even though we didn't get to move into the house for 2 months after that. And nature the beast, and we moved to Connecticut, about as far away from any military as you could think. We're the closest military base to where we are is 60 miles away, which is a Navy base. Closest Air Force base is 120 miles away. So the town doesn't have an active military presence. So you have a couple of people, you have some reservists, you have people who had joined the military and were on active duty and weren't around the area. But so again, we were a novelty. First off, the boys were the new kids in school, and their father's in the military. They've lived in Hawaii and Alaska, so they've never had a problem making friends and fitting in. I was at Pratt & Whitney for 3 years. I took 6 months of that. I deployed to Afghanistan. But at the end of the 3 years at Pratt & Whitney, I retired, and I took a job out in the commercial world at 2 different companies, and I missed supporting the warfighter. Working in the commercial world, it's all about the dollar and the bottom line and making a profit. And the companies I work for do support the warfighter, both of them. I wanted to be more directly supporting the warfighter and feeling that like I'm still part of that and not just sitting on the sidelines.
So tell me about getting to Afghanistan.
Getting to Afghanistan, DCMA does not have its own military equipment, so they use the Army system. So they sent me to Fort Bliss for 2 weeks to get my gear, get combat ready, because we fell in on the Army system. We fell in on Army rules, and they. So that's where I went. I got my chemical gear, the gas mask, the helmet, the body armor, and drew my weapon out there to go on my deployment. Went to Afghanistan. We've been in Afghanistan for quite a while, so I went into an established area. And I was the DCMA commander for Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Djibouti. And I had offices around Afghanistan and in Uzbekistan and Djibouti. So again, it was providing support to the warfighters. Contracting is a supporting role. Everywhere I've ever been, it has been in a support role. Making sure that the warfighters have the equipment that works when they need it to work. Whether it is operational shower facility, which is one of the things that we did when I was in Afghanistan, the LOGCAP, which is the Logistics Civil Augmentation Program contract. They did our dining facilities, our living facilities. They ran the laundry. They did basically everything that we no longer have the organic capability to do ourselves. They ran the fuel farms. They did a little bit of everything for us.
How did you find Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, not too bad. I only went on one convoy while I was there, and it wasn't as stressful as doing a convoy in Iraq. And at that time, I don't think it was much of a threat as it is today. I think it has picked up over there today. So not too bad. Just a long time away from the family. Again, feeling that that part of the being right on the front line, being part of the mission, it's hard to explain. One thing I'll say about all the deployments and just a huge sense of camaraderie. My 3 deployments, I was in the Air Force, but I never went to an Air Force unit. I was attached to NATO when I was in Bosnia. I was attached to the coalition, which was joint multinational, when I was in Iraq. And when I was in Afghanistan, I was attached to DCMA, which is also joint. But the people I dealt with the most in all of those locations was the Army, because it's truly more ground operations and air operations for all my deployments.
And in Afghanistan, were there any casualties or anyone?
Not that I saw. When I was in Afghanistan, the casualties were, I was at Bagram Air Base, which was probably the biggest we have over there. And any casualties were any of the soldiers who got killed in action would come through Bagram. And there's this one main road going through Bagram Air Base. And when the remains of these fallen soldiers would go to meet the airplane to come home, everybody on the base would line this road and give them a final salute. And in the first couple of days I was there, a helicopter got shot down and 16 people got killed. So that was my first impression of one of those. Stand there and see 16 flag draped coffins going out to that airplane. It's very sobering. And all the military from all the services are there rendering that last salute. And you never know. I mean, that could be you. Makes you think of your family. And that was the beginning of my 6-month deployment. That was a very vivid thing that still stands out to me. I returned back to my assignment with DCMA at Pratt & Whitney, and from there I retired. When I relinquished command, I had my retirement ceremony, and I retired in 2007.
Is that your discharge?
Yes.
And what was that like for you?
Very surreal. When having worn the uniform, 21 years active duty and 4 years as a cadet, to hang all of that up, it's a very strange feeling, because that had been all I had known for so long, and I was saying goodbye to it, and they were saying goodbye to me. And a very good friend of mine came and he presided over the ceremony, and I still keep in touch with him. But it's hard. to look back on 21 years, and it was like, wow, where did it all go? That time went by so fast. 21 years, I never had a job I didn't like. I was in some locations I wasn't real happy to be, but I never had a job I didn't like. I always enjoyed the people I worked with. My family and I, we always found things to do, found new places to see, because you never know when you would get back to that location again. In 21 years, I did 7 assignments in 7 different states, and so I never got stationed at the same base twice. 3 deployments to 3 different combat zones. Never even went to the same combat zone twice, and but it was a tough decision to get out, and I'd still be doing it today, but I couldn't do that to my family anymore. Uprooting my sons during school. When I got out, I had one of my sons was in college, one was in the middle of high school, and one was getting ready to start high school. And I couldn't do that to them anymore. And I had told my sons a long time ago, once I was at that point in my career where I could retire, we'd see what the Air Force had in store for us, and if it wasn't something that we all wanted, I would retire. So they were finally at the point where I could put my family before my country, instead of my country before my family.
Now some questions about your life.
Okay, the easy stuff.
Now, question is supposed to be, how did you stay in touch with your family? But I know that.
Well, actually, when I was in Bosnia, we didn't have email. Not until the last couple of weeks I was there, but I did have a phone. Being in contracting, you always have to have phones, so I was fortunate that I always had access to a phone in all my deployments. And you don't abuse it, because it's not, I would call my wife once or twice a week, or if I was feeling really lonely, or I knew she was feeling really lonely. And but again, don't abuse it, because it was a luxury, it was a privilege, because I've seen the soldiers standing in line waiting to use the phone, and trying to keep in mind that I did have some luxuries that not everybody had, but I had phones at all of them. And the last couple of weeks I was in Bosnia, I did have email too. And the other 2 deployments, I always had email.
What was the food like in there?
The food in Iraq was out of this world. It was phenomenal. No question about it. The food in Bosnia, not so much. It's a different standard. It was a NATO standard. But I always had a hot meal. At all the deployments, I always had a hot meal. But the best food was when I was in Iraq. And I don't know why. At all of the locations, one night a week, they do generally steak and lobster, or steak and shrimp, or steak and shrimp and lobster. And I know it's people in the States say they think that we're probably spending too much money on something like that. But you know what? You never know when that's going to be that person's last meal. Like I say, that first few days I was in Afghanistan, I saw 16 flag draped coffins. It makes it very, very real. I don't even know how many people we've lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. Too many to keep track of. But I'd like to think that one of those last meals was something that I don't know. I don't know how to put it, but you just never know. Or something more than sea rats. Yes, they don't make sea rats anymore. Most people call them sea rats.
Oh.
So I've eaten sea rations, and now it's meals ready to eat, and they've evolved over time. Because you got to be able to feed your troops on the move, and they're cheap or not cheap. They're light, they're portable, and they can be stored for a long time.
Now, you did most of the supplying, but did you have enough supplies for what you needed to do?
Yes, always. Contracting, we buy stuff, so I always my whole career, I always took care of myself last. First, you support the troops that are going outside the camp, and first and foremost, that's what we were there for. Make sure they had everything that they needed. We'd have people go out on patrols in Iraq, and I'd be standing in this wonderful dining hall, waiting for some awesome food, and you'd see these soldiers coming off patrol and just getting in line, and most of the time people would move them all the way up to the front of the line, and so you've been out in this stuff. You deserve to get yourself a decent meal so you can go back and shower, because they have their established meal hours.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
Everywhere. The most stress was probably in Iraq, because it was a very active combat zone, and long hours, the heat. Like I said, I just had my gallbladder taken out a couple weeks before that, but very politically charged environment, long hours, and people are like, well, why do you work the long hours? Because the work needs to be done. And what else are you going to do? My family is back home, and a lot of the people in the roles that I had were working 16, 18-hour days. And every day. I used to take off on Sunday. I'd slack off on Sundays. I'd only work like 12 hours so I could go to church.
How did you handle your stress or try to handle it?
I never had time to think about it, really. Go to the exchange, or when I'd eat with friends. We'd try to sit with different people, not always just sit with ourselves, and talk with people. Where are you here from? What do you do? Some people can't tell you what they do.
And that's interesting.
Yeah, that says a lot. Knowing what all is going on, and they say they can't tell you what you do. Oh, okay. Say no more.
Was there anything special that you did for good luck?
No, not a big believer in luck.
Anybody else that you knew?
Not that I can think of. I really thought about that.
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, you have, excuse me. How did people entertain themselves? I don't know. When I was in Iraq, there was no time for entertainment. We had a couple of pools on the compound where I was, so there were opportunities, excuse me, to go relax. The USO would bring shows to town from time to time, and I don't know, I was always working.
Did you ever attend any of the USO shows?
There was one USO show that came to Afghanistan when I was there, and I could not go because I had to go out of the country. And my timing was always, I got to the place just after, and I left just before. So, yeah.
Did you get to go on leave at any point?
I had the opportunity, I never took it. For the people who were there for a year, they are given a couple weeks and they always get priority. When I'm only there for a couple months, it just didn't make sense to me to take off for a couple of days and not be able to do anything because I'm in the Middle East or I'm in Eastern Europe. I had small kids, so my wife and kids were not going to fly to Europe to meet with me. I knew some people that did that. So I just never did it.
Better to just kind of barrel through.
Yeah, and because of the nature of my job, I was going around the country to different compounds, and I just kind of took that as my break. When I was in Bosnia, I had to go back to Heidelberg in Germany a couple of times, and I was like, you know what? That was break enough for me. When I was in Afghanistan, I spent probably about a week every month going back to Kuwait, and that was my break for me. In Iraq, there just was no break. But I was only there for 3.5 or 4 months, because at the time that's how long the Air Force rotations were, and I didn't need to take a break. There's no time to take a break, and so I just didn't. I don't know what I would have done.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
In the military or in the deployments? Just in general?
Yeah, whatever you got.
Wow. I wish you would have told me that before I would have thought of something, because I'm sure there are plenty of them. Like I say, in the various assignments and the deployments, there's always a lot of camaraderie, and you try to have fun. And I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I can think of one. I flew into Uzbekistan, and I was traveling with a colonel, and colonels, they generally let fly up on the flight deck, right behind the flight crew. And they had an extra seat, so I was sitting up there too. We landed in Uzbekistan, and you know how when you get to the airport, you have the guys with the orange batons waving the plane. This airman out on the tarmac, he's got these giant foam green hands directing the airplane. So that was pretty funny. But for me in particular, I can't think of anything. Sorry, hitting that microphone.
And my related question, and you might not have anything, is do you remember any of the pranks that, or if there were any pranks that anyone pulled on each other?
I can't remember any. I'm sure there were probably a few, but it's not TV, it's not the movies, and it's very serious. I'm sure there were some pranks, but nothing like you see in TV and the movies.
I think by the end you want to come back to the unusual event question.
Okay.
What did you think of fellows on your level and then superiors?
What did I think of them? Since I've been back from Iraq, every now and then I see articles about people accepting bribes, people taking kickbacks, because you're in contracting. And people I was associated with, we'll email these around, because some of them are people we actually knew. and you can't believe it. And this one email had a general officer on it. So I was fortunate that we're all talking in disbelief. So I was fortunate in all my time. I never felt like I was in a position where I had to compromise my integrity, and I was never asked to compromise my integrity. And the people I was with, very professional, and it's disheartening to see that we have Americans that are doing that. So just because you go to a different country, you don't check your morals at the door. You don't give up your morals. You don't compromise your integrity. You're still an American, but they're also human. So there's not much you can do to control that. But I would say everybody I was with, very professional, very dedicated.
Did you keep a journal at all?
No. Sometimes I wish I would have. Make it a lot easier to tell you the stories, wouldn't it?
So, we were talking a bit earlier about ending your military career and how that felt for you. What did you do in the immediate time after that?
Look for a job. That's very nerve-wracking. I never had to do that before. That was the longest I had ever been without a job since I was 15. It took me 4 months from the time I had my retirement ceremony till the time I went back to work. And it wasn't from lack of trying. I put out my applications, but I finally got a job.
And that job was?
My first job after I retired, I was doing supply chain management for a helicopter transmission company, Temkin Aerospace Transmissions, and that was here in Connecticut. Because my sons didn't want to move, and the family didn't want to move, it kind of limited my job opportunity. If I wanted to move back down to Maryland, jobs are all over the place for people with my background.
Did you make any close friendships in the service?
Yes. Yes, actually, I was traveling a couple of weeks ago and had dinner with two friends of mine from Iraq. They're also retired now. They were both Army guys I worked with when I was in Iraq. And there are a few people that I keep in touch with from going as far back to my first assignment. Again, the camaraderie, you form close bonds.
Did you join any veterans associations?
I am currently a member of the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and I'm a member of the American Legion. I'm a member of Military Officers Association. What is it? There's Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Association, IAVA.
Are you active in those?
Not really. I'm just a member.
What did you go on to do as a career after service?
After I retired, I was job hunting for about 4 months. From the time I retired to the time I started my first job, it was about 4 months. And part of that, the reason it took so long is because we opted to stay in Connecticut, so we didn't have to uproot the kids again. And there's the job market here just at the time was not the greatest. And I took a job with a helicopter transmission company here in Connecticut. That was my first job out of the Air Force.
Did your military experience influence you thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yeah, being in the military, and I grew up in the military. Dad was in the Army, and never really understood, what it was. It's kind of the family business. All of his brothers were in the military. My brother was in the Army, and I chose the Air Force, and somebody had to get it right. But the military, in general, there's all kinds of inter-service rivalries. But when you're in the combat zone, those inter-service rivalries kind of fall by the wayside. There's some quips back and forth, but at the end of the day, you're all there to do a mission. And whether you're Army, Air Force, you have a respect for your comrades at arms who are also wearing the uniform to serve the country. All those deployments were also multinational, and it was the same thing. Any of the political barriers, that's not for you, not in that deployed environment. But you have that common thread that you're in the military supporting that mission. So working with the other nations, that's a lot of fun. But you learn that you can't always influence the politics that put you there, and you have to trust that our nation's leadership is trying to do the right thing. I have not. We've had my missile wing, which was my first assignment. They had a reunion here just a couple weeks ago, and unfortunately, I was already traveling. I was in training, and I could not cancel the training. Hopefully, sometime in the future, I will.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
One of the big things, I think the military works to eliminate any prejudices you may have had. I like to think I didn't have any, but you learn more about people in general. I've learned I have no tolerance for prejudice, whether it's for somebody's skin color, their religious preference, or where they're from. Don't immediately assume everybody is a certain way because of a stereotype. One of the conversations I had with my interpreters in Bosnia, Bosnia was part of former country of Yugoslavia, which was a communist country. And so, growing up, we're always led to believe that all communists are spies, and they laugh. Why would you think that? It's like, well, it's the pop culture. It's in the movies, it's in the TV, and all communists are spies, and they just laugh because just the opposite, or similar for them, is that all Americans are sex crazed, drug addicts, and just want money. So I guess it works both ways. But when you get to know somebody, you get to respect them, and I think just my experience, my training, mostly the experiences, people are people, and you've got to respect the differences, and the main thing, key word there, is respect.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we have not covered?
21 years in the military went by so fast. I don't regret it for a minute. It's an honorable profession. I don't think any of my sons are going to go into it, and that's their choice based on, it's a different world today. When I went into the military, it was during the Cold War. You really only had that one enemy that you had to worry about, and that was the Soviet Union. And you didn't have the deployments and all the skirmishes going on around the world. But it's a great way of life. You get to travel, form close friendships, and meet people from all around the world. I enjoyed my time. I enjoyed serving my country.
Did you happen to think of any
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Um,
You gonna lead me in with a question?
I see that you have a well-decorated bear.
Travel bear. You want to zoom in? This is Travel Bear. When I went to Bosnia, my middle son's second grade class had Travel Bear. And the purpose of Travel Bear was to introduce the students to different parts of the country. And they had a couple of different Travel Bears who would travel with moms and dads. And they go on a work trip. Say, I went to Chicago, and they'd write a note in Travel Bear's journal. Well, the teacher asked me if I would take Travel Bear with me to Bosnia. It's the first time Travel Bear ever deployed. Reluctantly, I said, sure, I will. And while I was in Bosnia, you see he has little doodads from different places he went. Travel Bear didn't just travel with me. Travel Bear went with some of my co-workers. So one British airman took him to England. One Navy officer I worked with took him to Italy, and so he picked up all these little souvenirs all over the place where he went. And then when at the end of the deployment, we gave him a couple of medals. This is the NATO medal, the blue one here, and I can't remember, can't read it, but we gave him his medals. But while I was in Bosnia, President Clinton came to town, and I had the opportunity to go be part of the American military that went to be visited by President Clinton and his family. And I took Travel Bear. I thought, I'll be able to write back to the kids and say, Travel Bear went and saw the president. Well, while I was waiting in line, where I was, I wasn't up close to the front, or I wasn't close to where the president would be speaking. So I figured, well, I'll just tell the kids that I saw Travel Bear. But where I was standing, the official party came down and shaking hands with the military, and Chelsea Clinton came up, President Clinton's daughter, and she came up, and I asked if it'd be possible to get a picture with her and the family with Travel Bear. She says, well, it's kind of hard to get Dad and us all together, but if you get us each individually. So I do have a picture of Travel Bear with President Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton and then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, all holding Travel Bear. And when I wrote the class and let them know, well, I immediately went back to my office and called my wife and said, you'll never believe it. So it was a big surprise for the kids. I sent pictures of Travel Bear with the president and the first family. And the teacher, she said, this Travel Bear was not going to travel again, and she gave them to me as a souvenir. So it's probably my biggest souvenir I have from any of my deployments, and that's Travel Bear.